Welcome back. Today, we are going to touch on the second part of the little-known secret to real estate investing. We are going to look at two things, the rent and the option. Can you please start by telling us about the rent? Thank you. In setting the rent for a lease option, determine the rent levels acceptable in the market. You can look up rental comparison sources for this purpose. After this, do a thorough cash flow analysis. Avoid being distracted by the large lump sum at the end of the lease period. You need to look at the sufficiency of the cash flow in the intervening months. A surplus of $150-$250 month after mortgage payments is good enough, although this still may not account for repairs, vacancies, etc. Does cash flow have any role to play here? A positive cash flow is important. It immediately tells you that if the house price and its resulting mortgage payment is lower than the prevailing rental rates, the deal is basically good. Besides, in case the tenant does not become a buyer, you are assured of the soundness of a straight rent deal. What are the challenges I may face? So far, everything has been straightforward. Now comes the tricky part. You have to think of the final objective, which is to sell the house to the tenant/buyer. If you set a rent now lower than the future amount of mortgage payments, insurance and taxes, it raises the likelihood that the tenant will not convert into a buyer. It will not make sense from his perspective. The safer way may be set a higher than market rental rate, that is, at a level equal to or above the future house payment. They get used to paying the higher amount. How should I handle rent credit? One word about rent credit: never treat it as a down payment on the house. A down payment may be interpreted as implying an ownership interest in the property. If things don't go well, you may not be able to evict the tenant but must go through a tedious, time-consuming foreclosure from an owner. Okay, let us now talk about the option. An option gives the right, but not the obligation, to buy something at an agreed price on or before an agreed date. It gives a tenant buyer the advantage of getting a guaranteed price on the house. If its value increases during the period of the option, they pay only the guaranteed price. If its value declines, they can choose not to buy the house. In practice, they are not too keen to just leave the home they've lived in for at least a year. Besides, they already have a sizable amount of money in the option. How should the option contract be drafted? The option contract should be written separately from the lease agreement. The option contract may be referenced in the lease agreement, and vice versa, but they should not be in the same contract. Always consult a lawyer in preparing these two documents to ensure their acceptability and to eliminate any ambiguities. The option contract states that the seller is giving the buyer the right to purchase the house for a specified sum of money and by a stated date. At this point, the option is the thing being sold and bought. This right is given in exchange for a consideration payment to be paid to the seller. The option contract should explicitly say that the consideration payment is not a down payment on the home, to avoid the ownership interest issue, and not refundable, because the right to the option has been delivered. How is the consideration payment set? Usually, the consideration payment is set at 1/3 of the value of the home. On a $150,000 house, the consideration payment is $1,500 minus $4,500. The buyer's situation is the key factor in setting the amount of consideration payment. He may be going through a period of bad credit, but that does not mean he has no money. He just cannot obtain a mortgage. When they ask about the consideration, you can say the rates and terms are flexible, but naturally the bigger the consideration payment, the more flexibility. Let the buyer make an offer. Is money the only consideration? While money is the primary concern, the time period is also important. The option should not be too short to give the buyer enough time to arrange for the purchase. It should not be too long to avoid foregoing other opportunities as home values increase. A 12 to 24 month period may be sufficient, and you could make adjustments down the road. Thank you. Let's meet again tomorrow to continue with this interesting discussion.